Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another Second Breakfast podcast. I'm Andy Roth alongside Phil Duvall. Say hi, Phil.
Hi, everybody.
Or just spin around in your chair. That's fine too. Yeah. So it's time for our weekly long form, and folks, we're gonna get a little personal today. Uh, that's not actually really all that true,
Andy,
is it?
when I was 4, my parents left me at the park, and no, we're not going to do that.
Mom, starting to like this kid. Okay. So you may know, Second Breakfast Nation, that Phil and I love movies.
What the heck you say?
Yeah. But, we're movie fans, we're film buffs, but no movie fan is the same. And while that is certainly true, Phil and I are not the same in our tastes and our loves. I think we're probably more similar than not. Um, I know that's the case, and I think a lot of that has to do with how we react to movies. Um, and I actually mean by that what we react to when we see movies. And it's not to say that I react to everything as everyone does. I will notice an excellent score. I will notice amazing direction. I will, the cinematography. If the movie is beautiful enough, I will notice that. Um, but what I am mostly interested in, frankly, is the acting and the writing, the acting and the words that the actors are saying. Um, and that I don't think it's a stretch to say that that's because I have a background as an actor. Phil, would
Yeah,
you say that's fair?
yeah, I would say, like, I'm not sure what a good director really is.
Fair
And that's
enough.
my problem. Like, we've had this conversation before about, like, what it means to be, like, how you differentiate best director from best film. And some people are like, oh, it's really obvious. And I'm like, I guess it is. I don't.
For you.
I mean, I name my favorite directors, but what I'm really just saying is I generally really like the movies they make.
Right.
And I think Scorsese does certain things really specifically, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like there are certain characters whose decisions are so obvious and specific that it's hard not to acknowledge them as directors. I think Woody Allen, I think Martin Scorsese, I think Quentin Tarantino, I think the Coen brothers. But then again, it's really hard with, for instance, Woody Allen, Quentin Tarantino, and the Coen brothers to differentiate the writing from the directing. Scorsese doesn't write the screenplays, so it's actually, you can just look at him, but his movies
Right.
always are distinct.
Right.
Stanley Kubrick, obviously, is another one that you have to mention.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but realistically, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, Billy Wilder. I talk about how I think Billy Wilder is one of the best directors. What I mean is, but he wrote all the movies he directed that I love,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
co-wrote them, and I'm impressed with Billy Wilder the same way I'm impressed with the Coen brothers in that they make movies that span different genres and are all
Yep.
good. But how much of that is the writing and how much of that is the directing? I mean, is Ron Howard a good director? Everyone says it's hard. Well, I mean, the big knock on him was it's hard to tell because. So, anyways, I mean, that's a long way. I'm talking about directing, but the reality is, yeah, I mean, I think when I was a kid, I saw an interview recently with Tarantino. It's an older interview, but I saw it recently. It's his
Okay.
Iconoclasts interview. Have you ever seen that show Iconoclasts on IFC?
I haven't. I
Okay,
hear it's good.
it's like they
But
take two different people from two different like levels of life or two different whatever like fields. Like they put like Eddie Vedder and some surfer that I don't care about, but I don't care about Eddie Vedder either. Like some singer and some surfer together. Well, they put Fiona Apple and Quentin Tarantino together. Which, if you know
awesome.
me, that would be like if they put Fiona Apple and Quentin Tarantino together. Like that's how good it would be. So it was a few years ago, but I was watching it on you can find it on YouTube. And Tarantino says, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an actor. But all I really knew was I was watching movies going, I want to do that.
Yep.
And in my mind, what I saw was actors saying lines. So I guess I wanted to be an actor. Was how he. So when he said I want to be an actor, what he meant was I want to be part of that thing.
Yeah.
And I think that was true for me too. I think you see people saying lines, and you go, I want to be an actor, or I want to write those lines.
Right.
And I realized later that I just wanted to be a storyteller. And that actually helped bridge me to my current job. I mean, that helped bridge my understanding. Like, that I could be a storyteller as a priest. That in
Sure.
fact there's a huge priestly element to storytelling, and that made my job. That made my understanding of how I was switching careers like make sense.
Sure.
If that makes sense, I don't know.
It does. It absolutely does. Um, I I although it ended up not being the field of law that I wish to go into and stay, that is when I went to law school, it was to be a litigator. And
Yeah.
if you're acting to 12 people on a jury, that's still acting, right? You're
Kind
still
of
telling a
surprised.
story.
Kind of surprised you didn't do that. Not because you should. I'm proud of you and the path that you're taking, my friend. But had you chosen to be a litigator, it would have been pretty crazy.
Yeah, yeah,
And by
yeah.
crazy people, I mean BANANAS bananas.
Yes, yes. I would have been the Patch Adams of the courtroom. Um, so we are meandering around to our point,
For
and
the
that
first
is
time ever.
for the first time. Stunningly, we did not get right to the point. Um, I love language. I
Yeah.
love it, and the way, and I fully realize that there is something in some sense ridiculous about this, but I have found kindred spirits, one of which is Phil, who do the same thing, and that is when we hear language we like, defined here as a line in a movie or a speech in a movie, we like to memorize it and repeat it. And when I say we, like, I don't think I've ever, with one exception, I don't think I have ever sat down to memorize lines from a movie. But
No.
they stick in my head.
Yes.
They stick in my head. The one exception being when I auditioned for the play in college and memorized Dr. Evil's childhood monologue.
So proud of you for that.
I thank you. I appreciate that. I do. So
That's
they
really
just
funny
sort of
because do you know what my monologue was?
what?
Patton.
When you put your hand in a
No bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country. I used to know the
nice.
whole thing, like backwards and forwards. It was awesome.
Oh yeah, awesome. Yeah. And of course, actually the first time I heard the pile of goo line was on The Simpsons.
Me too. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Forget it, Marge. It's
Which
Chinatown.
is hilarious because I was like, because then, interestingly enough, I think I saw Chinatown before I saw Patton.
And you were like, that's not. How does. What?
Where's the goo?
I'm not
Where's
out
the
of
goo line?
order. You're out of order. This whole system's out of order. And when you stick your hand in a face that used to a pile of goo that used to be your best friend's face, forget it, Marge. It's Chinatown. That's perfect. That's a perfect segue, by the way, because that's Homer misquoting or quoting a bunch of movies, which is what we're talking about today. But I used to quote The Simpsons nonstop. Like, and that was a big bonding thing. We had a person on the show a couple weeks ago, dear friend of ours, Mike Robb, and a big part of our bonding came through quoting The Simpsons and quoting an MTV sketch show from when we were growing up called The State. And one of my best friends from my dorm hallway freshman year. Do you remember like freshman year when your dorm hallway would all try to be friends?
Yeah.
And sometimes it worked. I'm actually still jealous. I have some friends, like a lot, basically everybody from my hallway is still friends except for like four of us, and I'm one of them. And it's like kind of like,
Oh.
yeah, I just never fit in with them right. I mean, we all like each other. I don't have animosity. I don't have any, at least they might have animosity towards me. They don't tell me because why would you? You don't like me. I'm a jerk. But so we all got on the subway and we were riding into Cambridge together. Look at us, because we didn't get into Harvard, so we didn't just walk down the street to Cambridge. We actually
Oh,
had to get on the
jeez,
T to do
jeez.
it. It's true. So anyways, we got on the T. We're going down to Harvard Square, and I remember one of my friends just made some random Simpsons quote. Or he wasn't my friend yet. He was like one of these kids in the hallway that I'd never spoken with, and he made some
Right.
random Simpsons quote, and I was just like. And I made some quote back, and then we literally went back and forth, and everyone else was like, "Oh God, they're still going." Literally 2 hours later, we were just like playing tennis, like that scene in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern where they're just throwing things back and forth. We were just throwing Simpsons quotes back and forth, and now he's still one of my best friends in the world. So there you go.
Awesome. Awesome.
It's bonding. It's bonding.
It is. It is. It's And it's a weird thing. Like, why is that bonding? I have had that experience too. I haven't had it with Simpsons
Come on,
quotes
you know why it's
because I
bonding.
don't
You know why it's bonding. I
because
mean,
you're kindred spirit.
yeah, because you go
Yeah.
like, oh, that thing that I found funny, you found funny. I mean,
Yeah.
it's short. It's I think that my favorite term ever is I remember reading something with Scorsese and De Niro working together, and they'd worked together so many times, and then when one of the things he said, it's like the best part about it is it's like you get to talk in shorthand,
Yep.
and I think when you meet someone or when you getting to know someone and they quote something that's dear to your heart, it becomes a shorthand. It's like,
Right.
oh, I mean, you and I have little things that we say back and forth to each other now. We talk in shorthand a lot. But a big part of that is like, if I say this quote and we both say it, it's like, it's not just that you've seen that movie. It's that you've seen that movie. It meant something to you and you know how to apply that line in everyday life.
Yes, and what I think is interesting about that is something that is unique to writing, or unique to writing and acting. Because if cinematography is important to you, I can't make something look really pretty and you appreciate it the same way. Does that make sense? Like,
Yes.
the score, with the possible exception of the score, because people know the Jaws theme, people
Yeah.
know the Psycho theme,
Yeah.
but those don't come up as often.
Mm-mm. Do you know what I think is funny is the most famous score of the last uh, 10, 15 years is?
Hmm.
Bwah! Bwah! Like,
It is
that's it.
everywhere,
Way to go, Inception. And then they
right?
use it in Prometheus, the Prometheus preview.
See, the people who cut together trailers would all be out of work because I don't even remember a time before Inception. What did they use?
Bwah!
What did they use for musical cues in
Bwah! That,
blah?
I wish that person had won an Oscar for that.
Right? Best
They
use of
should have.
blah.
It counts.
Yeah,
So,
totally, totally. So okay. So I want to divide this further. Because because they are different pleasures, right? Within loving the writing and within loving reciting quotes,
mhm.
there is there is the love of just an awesome speech, right? Where you
Okay.
like the Bill Pullman as the president at the end of Independence Day. That
I
is
like
not a
that.
good movie.
If that's our Acme. That's our Acme, by the way.
Honestly, it's got to be close. So, and you know what? It might be at the top if you take quality of speech relative to the quality of the rest of the movie, because it's not a good movie. But after that speech, and I have heard that speech probably 30 times.
Yep.
After that speech, I want to enlist in the armed forces every time. Yeah, just like,
Yes. A good monologue feels real good.
yeah, it does.
Feels real good.
But there is also the pleasure of dialogue. Before we started recording, and frankly, gender doesn't matter, number of people in the scene doesn't matter. Before we
Gender
started,
always matters. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, disagree. In you may have heard us do this on the podcast, but we absolutely did it just before we started recording. Phil said, "Do you have a kiss for Daddy?" And I said,
Are you
"Are
kidding?
you kidding?" And then we both said together, "So
So
that's how it
that's
is in
how
my
it
family."
is in their family.
Right?
We do it
And
all the
that is
time.
from
Yeah.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yeah.
That is a boy talking to a girl, and then a third person responds.
But it's the
Right?
whole scene, man. It's the whole
Whole
scene.
scene.
I like dialogue way better than monologues, for the record. Monologue, when like the question of are monologues really meaningful? I mean, obviously there are ones that we can talk about,
Sure.
but and we will, because what else are we gonna do with our lives? Work. Come on, hang out with our families and live lives.
What?
Dialogue is for me way more fun, and I mean, so when I quote things, it's usually one line rather than a monologue. And that's an example, or an exchange rather than a monologue. And that's why it's even better. When you can quote an exchange back and forth,
Yes.
I mean, another one is, of course, is like when you say to someone, have fun storming the castle,
Think it'll work?
it would take a miracle.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.
Like, that's the kind of thing. Like, you gotta, if you've got that, it's like, that's love. Your trust, it's like a trust fall.
That's
I mean,
right.
come on. It's everything, you know? It's the most fun. It's like the way you can have fun.
That's true.
So,
That's true. But I will submit this to you.
oh my gosh, submission.
um, the maybe not just as much fun, but the speech that Wesley gives gives Prince Humperdinck when Humperdinck doesn't know that Wesley is still basically drained from the machine. And he's telling him about what to the pain means. And yes,
Okay,
yes,
yes.
that is dialogue, right?
Yes.
Because Humperdinck is interjecting, but clearly the more important part of the two is what Wesley's saying until Humperdinck gets to, and then you'll take my ears, I get it, let's move on. He's like, wrong,
Right.
you know?
Your
And
ears
then
I
it
will
just
leave.
ends,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
ends
yeah,
with
yeah.
drop your
Your soul.
soul. And it's just, I mean, right? That what you just did, for those listening, Phil just did a little jig sitting in his chair. And that is what I do every time I see that scene. And every time I think of that line. Every time I think of that line, I am the peasant farmer saving the princess whom I love.
Yeah.
And it doesn't and for those listening, I do not look like Carrie Elwes. You may be
What?
surprised to learn. You may be surprised
You
to learn.
are way better looking. You have aged much better than him, frankly.
I
You're a better
I
actor than him.
leave that without a response.
Okay.
But everyone can say the things that people say. You can't look like somebody else. Sometimes you can't even act like them. But the words are universal because
Sure.
anyone can use them.
Yeah.
And it is an interesting phenomenon because I really do feel like I'm in the movie when I say the lines.
Sure.
I mean, is that totally? I know it's a little crazy. I'm aware that it's a little crazy.
It's okay. No, it isn't totally crazy. It's a little crazy.
That's fine.
But I think
I'm okay with
it's crazy in the way you expect artsy people to be crazy. And I think
Yeah.
I think I'm going to get a little religious here,
Okay.
shockingly.
I am stunned.
This to me is the point of liturgy and the point of worship and the point of reading stories, the holy stories publicly in groups, is that in reading them aloud, we remember them and remember them in such a way that we actually become a part of them. When you hear the story of Moses crossing, raising his arms and parting the Red Sea and people crossing and Pharaoh coming down, every single one of us wonders, like we all picture, all of us immediately are like, what would it be like to cross the Red Sea with the water like up on the side? Like if you've heard the story, you put yourself in it. And so it makes perfect sense when you quote the line that you're a part of the story. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. That's why we have stories. That's why they exist.
Right.
Is so that we can experience these things either
Right.
for the first time or vicariously or again or live into something that we believe in but haven't been able to experience.
Right.
I think that's part of it.
We as humans do not like stories because we like hearing about what happened to someone else.
Yes.
We like them because we envision ourselves in the story.
Yes.
This is really Go ahead.
No, this is really what? I'm interested to see what you're going to say.
I just like this is Phil and I started this podcast and we were like, let's talk about movie speeches and movie lines that we like. I didn't expect to get into like the religious and even evolutionary reasoning behind storytelling. But
Well,
I mean,
this is what happens when you get two pretentious people to talk about really meaningless stuff. Ta-da!
two pretentious people. Who are they?
But two other people.
'Cause I'm
two other
not-
people.
and
Two other
you're-
people that we listen to. No, we're
okay.
we're salt of the earth.
Oh, okay,
We're
good.
salt of the earth, Andy. Salt of the earth.
Mm.
I
Pretentious salt.
think yeah, we're like sea salt from France.
We're
Okay?
kosher salt.
We are. We no.
Right?
We're not even like we're like that. You still have to crumble it. Big chunks of stuff that's been like scraped off of like the belly of an endangered
Comes
orca
in a
or
little
something. That
ramekin on the side of your
salt. Right.
dish.
That's what we are.
Nice.
Um,
Well done.
I
Well
uh,
done.
I have to. This conversation is making me realize something, which is that I actually don't really care for monologues. I mean, don't get me wrong. Hyman Roth's monologue in Godfather 2. This is the business we've chosen, you know? Or Michael Corleone in Godfather 1, like if anything should happen to my boy, you know, if lightning should strike him, you know, like these monologues do matter and they're great. But I don't think I memorize them, and maybe I quote "This is the business we chosen," but I ain't gonna quote the whole monologue because here's the problem, right? And we all knew it. Well, maybe not everybody knows these kinds of people. You know, I don't know if you're listening to the show. Andy and I are part of a particular breed of crazy person, which is a drama major. Drama majors are so lame, okay?
Oh,
And if you're
yeah.
not one, just thank your lucky stars you did anything else with your life. But I do think that even if you're not a drama major, everyone who's been in a clique or a group has had those friends that while everyone was interacting, all of a sudden somebody performs or grandstands. It just happens all the time with theater groups. It's totally, it's like
Right.
everybody takes turn being but
King of the mountain.
it always kind of, and I'm not saying I've never been guilty of it. That would be obnoxious. I'm sure I'm guilty of it. I mean, kind of what we do on this show. We do it with each other. That way we can just get it out and then hopefully be
Indeed.
better at our normal lives. But I always felt like it's sort of like when you watch those interviews with Robin Williams, where you don't actually feel like Robin Williams is interacting with the host.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean he's not brilliant and talented. It's just, dude, Conan's talking to you or Letterman's talking to you. Just sit down and listen to him talk to you. Have a conversation.
Right.
Monologues can be great, but I think they can also be almost like that thing where we're living vicariously into something, but there's something false about it, or can be false about it. Even in great ones, don't really tap into anything that rings true for me, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It does make sense. I think I have always, I don't want to say enjoyed, but I have never minded a little bit of artifice.
Sure.
You know?
No. You are much more comfortable with artifice than I am, and I don't mean that in any way that's
Right.
pejorative.
No, I think you're absolutely right about that. I think you're absolutely right about that. So we might feel exactly the same way about the amount of artifice in monologues.
Yep.
It just
Yep.
bothers me less.
Sure. But dialogues are always, I love dialogues. I love interacting. I would never want to do a show by myself. I love doing this with you.
Yes.
I would never want to talk about movies into a microphone by myself, but I want to have a conversation about it. I remember when I was a kid and they had this thing where I was in youth group and they were like they wanted us to like do this presentation. We had like a modern contemporary service that was supposed to get the kids to church, and I just went to church because they told me to go. Who was like, come on, it didn't matter what it was. I didn't even like the contemporary services. I would rather go to the old language ones, where at least I knew the music was going to be bad. They didn't play this music that was terrible and tell me it was good. But we had to do these, like, instead of sermons, we were putting on these skits, these biblical skits. It just sounds awful the more I get into it. But I had this one where it was supposed to be this monologue of, like, one of the guys who's on the cross next to Jesus or something like that, right? And I basically was like, I'm not going to do this. I was, by the way, 12 or 11. And I was like, I could have been, it's possible I was 13 or 14, but it was between 12 and 14. Like, it's around there. And I said, I'm not going to do this. And the guy was like, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't want to, this is dumb. And he was like, and no one, by the way, just so you know about churches, like, no youth leader ever wants to hear that. There was like, well, but I'm hip. What do you mean? But I was like,
completely prepared for someone saying that to me.
I'm so relevant. I'm relevant. God, religion is so lame. So it is. I love Jesus so much, but it's so crazy the things that we do to ourselves in his name. So anyways, so this guy's like, well, what do you want to do? And I just looked at him and I was like, can we turn this into a dialogue? He's like, what? And I was like, can you interview me, like, as that character? And he was like, I guess we could do that. And we did it, and it was great. And I'm not telling that story to be like, I'm amazing. I am amazing, by the way. But
Right.
that's not why I'm telling that story. I'm telling that story because I remember from a very young age, I was just like, I don't want to stand up in front of people by myself, which is weird that now I'm a preacher and I do that for a living. But my favorite parts of the service are actually the call and response.
Yeah.
My favorite thing about performance was interacting with other actors. And when I had monologues, it was like doing whatever I could to, without breaking the fourth wall, feel the audience and what was
That's
going
right.
on.
That's right. Because there is interaction
Really
there.
important. Yes.
Yeah. There is interaction there, but it's almost. Interestingly, long monologues are better for that because long monologues gives the audience, certainly in live theater, it gives the audience more time to focus on you.
Yep.
And then that's when you start feeling the interaction
Yep.
between you and the audience. Whereas if it's just slightly longer than a line or two, there, like you might not tap into that. And that's a little.
And from that point of view, monologues can be great, but they can't. Again, they're not quotable. That's the problem for me. Is they're not.
Right.
We started this thing about talking about quotes and how they bring people together. Monologues don't bring people together.
That's true.
That's the thing. I
That's
love
true.
quotes because it's like they go like, "Oh, you know that thing. I know that thing."
Right.
We have a friend named Aaron who was the lead in that Russian play, and his performance was still to this day one of the most amazing things I've ever seen someone do.
Agreed.
It was ridiculous, and but he had. You remember? I think it was the end of one of the acts. The act ended with him doing like some ridiculous monologue. I mean, it was like a 10-minute monologue or something. I mean, it was ungodly.
But
And
real
then
quick,
his character passes out when it's over.
right. Real quick, audience. This Russian play that Phil is speaking of was 4 hours long. So
it was so mean.
When Phil says how ridiculous this, like, there was a lot of room for a monologue to expand into truly absurd, in the purest sense of the word absurd, length.
I had the deepest love-hate relationship with that whole play. I really do.
I
because it was so terrible in so many ways, and yet it had things like this monologue, which was, again, I will till the day I die, I will respect him for that.
Sure.
It was beautiful, and I'll never forget. I mean, I was mesmerized by my friend and what he accomplished that day.
Yeah.
But I don't remember one line of it. But I do remember from that play somebody going, "He's ubiquitous. He's everywhere at all times." Right? Like, I remember that line from that play. Like, that's
Nice.
funny. That's the thing about quotes is, I'm not going to quote, "Oh, he did this great monologue. What was it about?" Never mind. It was just really long and amazing. But I can say
really good.
he's everywhere. But I can say he was everywhere at all times, and everybody, it's like you don't actually remember any of Brando's monologues from Apocalypse Now, but you remember the horror,
Right.
the horror. You know.
Right.
So
Yes, and even there's something interesting about that, because even with monologues and famous monologues, what you probably remember is one or two lines from it. For example,
and usually the beginning or the end of them.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, that's sort of a chicken or the egg thing. Is it because they're the first and last thing you hear, is because, like, the writer is designing them to start and end well?
It's a good question.
Good
question. But I mean, like, for instance, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Smells like victory. Is the beginning of a monologue. That's not the whole line.
Yes. Yeah. Sticking with Brando. Perhaps his most famous line from his entire career, "I could have been a contender." Is the end of a monologue. Maybe Rod Steiger. He's sitting in a car with his brother, played by Rod Steiger. Maybe Rod Steiger has a line or two in there.
Wasn't his brother Carl Malden?
What?
Wasn't Carl Malden his brother?
Not On the Waterfront.
Okay, go ahead.
And
he's like the contender instead of a nobody, which is what I am.
Right. Instead of a
Part of a
bum,
big bong.
which is what I am.
Right.
And that line, obviously, like, I could have been somebody. I could have been a contender instead of a bum, which is what I am. Obviously, that is fraught with meaning, right? But when it comes at the end of this speech, and by the way, you can very easily make the case that in that speech, in that scene, Marlon Brando changed film acting forever.
What a
Uh,
jerk.
what?
What a jerk.
Right? Thanks, Marlon. Um, you really can. I mean, that is when it became less presentational and more sort of method, if you will. And that was kind of the moment. And yet, even though it is more powerful when you hear the entire speech, and even though there are other great lines in that speech, and I don't think it's just because it's easier to remember something short. I think there is something to the fact that people respond to lines better than they do to speeches.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just, come on. Who wants to, like, there's one thing if, like, you know, we say one little line back and forth to each other. You know, it's like anytime you order bacon, you go, bacon tastes good, pork chops taste good, right?
Right.
Like, what do you? I don't dig on swine. What are you, Jewish? No, man, I just don't. You know, I don't eat anything that doesn't have a sense of sitting on those feces. You know, pig's a filthy animal. Like, you can do these little bits from Pulp Fiction, but
Yeah.
if I was just like, or, you know, like, look at the big brain on bread. Like, pretty much every line from Pulp Fiction is quotable. But if all of a sudden I was just like Ezekiel 25:17, the path of the righteous man, in the middle of lunch, you'd be like, "That's funny." Oh, he's still going.
You're still talking.
Okay,
Are
and
you
then it just,
aware that you're still talking?
so the thing about quoting movies back and forth is a way of saying we're part of something. Doing
Yep.
a monologue is a way of saying, "Look how amazing I am."
Right. Look at the awesome thing I did. And
And
and by the way, I'm defining awesome as spent time memorizing a speech.
yes, yes.
Right?
Which, by the
Which
way, is when you and I were 14, what we thought was awesome.
yes.
But then we turned 15 and got
Yep.
older and realized that that's not the case.
Yes. Here's this is sort of low hanging fruit, but um, everybody knows the line. You can't handle the truth.
I knew you were going to bring this up, and I wasn't going to bring it up because I knew you would. I actually
um,
know that monologue pretty darn close to the whole thing. It's
so
scary.
so
It's scary.
I have a story about that.
And who wrote
That
that monologue?
was
Who wrote that monologue that I know so well?
hmm
Who wrote
Aaron
that
Sorkin.
monologue? So there you go.
Who I in my old age I have come more towards your opinion of Aaron Sorkin. I still like him, but not nearly as much as I used to. Um, the man can write the crap out of a speech. Like
And as soon as you're done talking about what you're going to say, I have something to address that specific man and that specific idea. But go
sure.
ahead.
So I'll make this brief because I want to hear that. I was at one of the drama classes, one of the acting classes I was in, the first acting class, where I met one of my best friends in the world, a good friend of Phil's mine from college, a strapping young man named Jeff.
Hello, Jeff.
We we were tasked with memorizing a monologue, and this was, of course, when did A Few Good Men come out? Mid '90s, right?
Came out in 90. Well, yeah, I mean, yes, came out in 91 or 92, I think.
Okay.
92.
And this was in the fall of '97, right? It did
Yep.
not. It was around, and it was around recently, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes.
So when Jeff chose the "You Can't Handle the Truth" speech as the monologue,
Oh, Jeff.
I was I was like, you have made a tactical error. You have made a tactical error here. And I will never forget. And he did.
Milk was a bad choice.
Indeed, he did a more than commendable job. He is a very talented actor. He did very well, and then he got to, "You want the truth? You want the truth?" And he is sitting no more than 5 feet away from people, and people are starting to go,
Oh, poor Jeff.
and not, but it wasn't because he was doing it bad or because he was doing a laughable
It's just
job.
you can't separate it from Nicholson.
And he had said to me as we were practicing our monologues, he's like, I can't do this without laughing at the "you can't handle the truth" part. And so when he got to "you want the truth," I mean, I love him like a brother, but there was a moment where he just looked down and he was like, "Don't smile. Don't smile. Don't
Right.
smile." And he couldn't stop himself from smiling. And then he brought it back up. He's like, "You can't handle the truth." And then he was right
Right.
back into it. But I mean,
Yeah.
but that's a thing. Like that's a thing with speeches, and it's a thing with when you say them, whether or not you've rehearsed them or not. Whether you've rehearsed them or not, it's sort of a danger, if you will. I'm going to stop talking about that because I want to hear what you have to say about Aaron Sorkin.
Picture this. No,
Oh
I'm just
God.
kidding. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that today. I want to say before I forget.
Mm.
No, we need to. At some point, we just need to say that the greatest monologue in film history is the USS Indianapolis monologue from Jaws that Robert Shaw gives. And every rule that I say, that monologue is allowed to break, and it doesn't matter.
Yes.
It is the perfect film monologue.
Yeah,
It is in service of the plot. It is given by the right character at the right time. It's not perfectly worded, even though, but we'll get it. Okay, so anyways, that.
Yep.
I want to talk about Moses for a second, and it'll take us into Aaron Sorkin. And I will
That is not
speak.
going to do. That will do wonders for his ego. Please continue.
Well, I'm not going to say anything nice about Aaron Sorkin, so it works
Fair.
out.
Okay.
I'm actually
Okay,
going to work really hard to be charitable and speak ill of him in a way that's not speaking ill of him, if possible.
Okay.
I'm really just going to speak about my preferences and my tastes.
Please do.
We've all heard of the story, regardless of our religious upbringing, of the burning bush.
Indeed.
God speaks to Moses from a bush that is on fire but is not consumed. And it is
Indeed.
in this moment that God tells Moses, go back to Egypt, go to the king of Egypt and tell him to free all of the slaves. Which is a
fairly important moment.
And by the way, and he says, and tell him to let my people go.
Yes.
A ridiculous request from this God character to this Moses character, unquestionably. And the wonderful thing about it is Moses' response is a question, which is, who am I that the Pharaoh would listen to me? Phenomenal question, right?
Indeed.
Now, if I were writing this story, it would be way more Aaron Sorkin. Because I think one of the reasons that I chide against Aaron Sorkin so much, or I chafe against him, is because the things we don't like about others are the things that we like about ourselves.
Right.
I like to grandstand, I like to get big and all that, and so Aaron Sorkin feeds into my id in that sense. If I were to write God's response, God would say something like, Moses, who are you that the Pharaoh would listen to you? Moses, you were raised in the Pharaoh's household. You were raised as an Egyptian, a prince of Egypt, a son of the Pharaoh. He knows you like a son or like a brother. And you, but are actually a Jew. And so you have this connection to the Jews that no one else has. If ever there was anyone in the history of the world to speak to the Pharaoh on this issue and to be able to speak honestly and truthfully about freeing my people, Moses, by God, it would be you, Moses. It would be this group. Mm-hmm. God doesn't say any of that, okay? Moses says, who am I that the Pharaoh would listen to me? And God's response immediately is, I will be with you. Full stop.
Done. Right.
What God's saying is, it's not really about you, it's about me. So move on. And what could have been this amazing monologue becomes a dialogue.
Right.
And it's a real deflating moment for me as someone who loves theater and acting, that this would be this big moment for God to do these monologues. If you actually read the Bible, I mean, you have the prophets who go on and do these big monologues. But by and large, in the stories don't have God monologuing. The stories generally have God in conversation or people in conversation about God or whatever with each other. It's a lot more dialogues than it is monologues.
Sure.
But what I love about that in the long run, and the reason I bring this story up, is it rings more true. We
Yep.
like to think of life as this thing where when I go, why me? That another person, or, I mean, obviously, divinely, how amazing would it be if God was like, well, Andy, let me tell you why you. And then this beautifully delivered Aaron Sorkin speech of perfection comes out. But generally, it's something really deflating and more truthful, which is God goes, oh, it's not about you, it's about me, so don't worry about it. And then they actually have a conversation.
Right.
Okay? Why does this have to do with Aaron Sorkin? I will tell you why. For me, I have always said, you can't learn about the Beatles without hearing that the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were like, there was a rivalry there, although there wasn't really a rivalry between them so much as between their fans. And you're either a Beatles guy or a Rolling Stones guy.
Right.
Like, that's sort of the deal, you know? To me, when The Sopranos came out, it was you're either a Sopranos guy or a West Wing guy. You can like both,
Right.
but you're more one or the other. I happen just not to like West Wing. But
Okay.
people like both. Plenty of people. You like both. Plenty of people like both. But I feel like you have to pick one in the sense of like if you had to pick one, which one would you be?
Right.
One of the defining moments in West Wing is when President Bartlett's friend dies and he closes the doors of the National Cathedral and he lights a cigarette in the church and he yells at God in English and in Latin, "How dare you?" And he does this big like I'll tell you what, God, and it's perfectly crafted
Yep.
and it's very dramatic and amazing. And to me, it's utter nonsense and crap.
Okay.
It just goes against, to me it's not authentic.
Fair.
And the reason I bring it up in comparison to The Sopranos is the best way I can explain it. And this is why I love, and by the way, this is just my personal preference. You can totally disagree with me, it's fine. What I love about The Sopranos, one of the most defining monologues of The Sopranos, defining moments, is the beginning of, I want to say fourth season, but it might be fifth season. But it's the season that Steve Buscemi comes on. I think it's the fifth season. It's a season when Steve Buscemi comes on, and Steve Buscemi plays Tony Blundetto, Tony Soprano's cousin that's been in jail all these years. And you remember with The Sopranos, it was like it would show up for 12 episodes and then be gone for a year, and then show up for 12 episodes and be gone for like a year and a half. And you never knew when The Sopranos was coming back. He gets up, and they build this up like this is Tony's best friend from childhood. This is Tony's counterpart. He's back. He's out of jail. And they have this huge party, and it's the first episode of the season, and it's this welcome back to The Sopranos. And Tony Soprano gets up to give a toast to Tony Blundetto. And it is the worst toast. And it is unquotable, and it is unmemorable, and it is rambling. And I remember loving it because that's who Tony Soprano was.
Sure.
And you had this perfect picture of what he was supposed to be and what this show was and the writing, and you remember little key lines. But when it came time for him to stand up, there's the truth of Tony Soprano is actually very unimpressive. And the reality of The Sopranos is that in the end, it's about a guy who doesn't change. And we put all our hopes and dreams into him, and he's not that thing.
Right.
I always thought of those two, and again, this is just my personal thing, but I always thought of those two monologues up against one another. The perfect line said at the perfect time, no matter what, at all times, or people, very imperfect people, never quite saying the right thing.
Making their way through, yeah.
And my attraction is clear. There's something this, and it doesn't mean the writers of The Sopranos aren't good. It's like, to me, I was like, they had the cojones to write an anticlimactic monologue. Like they had sand to be like, this isn't going to be that impressive. Good luck with it, people. And I find that really, like, that to me has always pulled me more towards something. That was a really long time I talked. Sorry for that. That was my own...
That's okay. That's okay.
That was, by the way, a
monologue. It was really well said. You're right. Yeah. I just want to point out at this moment, Phil says he doesn't like monologues.
I'm just a disaster of a human being.
No, not at all. I think it's really well said, and I don't think I disagree with you. Again, I think it goes back to the fact that I don't mind artifice the way you do, so I don't mind it.
Sure.
in moderation, when everything is the perfect line at the perfect time and blah, blah, blah. My direct response, which again is not a disagreement, is is the TV show Friday Night Lights. Because that is a bunch of
That's
plain
not fair
spoken
because you can
people.
never. That's not fair because you can never be wrong saying that.
Right.
You're. No matter what someone says, you can just go Friday Night Lights, and I'll be like, Andy's right. Dang.
It is a powerful avatar that I wield.
Yeah.
It's. But again, I think the thing that I love about it is it's that blend, right? It's people who are in most cases not educated, in many cases not all that intelligent, fumbling their way through.
Yeah.
It is not a super quotable series, right? But round about once an episode, certainly once every 2 or 3 episodes, there will be a halftime speech from
Yep.
Coach. Or
Yep.
there will be a moment between Mrs. Coach and their daughter.
Yep.
Or someone that she is counseling in the school. And
Yep.
it is just like it is candy. It is candy that isn't bad for you. And
anytime Coach Taylor says, "I want to tell you something," get ready. Just get ready to cry. Let me tell you something. There's one of our buddies sent us a you can find it on YouTube. It's literally 4 minutes straight of different
Just
clips
going.
of Coach Taylor going, "I want to tell you something. Let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you something."
Can I talk to you?
And by
Can I
the
tell you
end of
something?
it, end of it, I was actually in tears, and it was literally just clips of him saying, "Let me tell you something," and you
Yeah.
can bet on that. It's just, I mean, it's like the bizarro George W. Bush, where like every time George W. Bush would be like, "I'm gonna tell you something," it would be like, "Oh, don't tell us anything, please." And by the way, I don't even that may sound like a partisan statement. Come on, Republicans, everybody knows this. Even when you believed in what he stood for, you'd be like, "Could someone else say it?" Is that
anybody? Pass
like
this
I
place.
remember when Tony Blair came to the United States and spoke in favor of the Iraq War to the Congress, and I was like, could he do all the speeches from now on for that? Because even if you don't agree with it, at least you're hearing the best version. Coach Taylor's like the bizarro version of that. Every time he's like, "Let me tell you something," it's gonna be just start writing it down.
Right. Hit the record button.
I have a friend named Chris Ball who, whenever he's about to say something declarative, he goes, "Write it down," and then he says something, or he'll say it and he'll be like, "You can write that down."
Awesome.
I might write that down.
Yes, it's fascinating. It's fascinating the things that draw us and the things that attract us to because we are all in some sense hypocrites, right? Because I say things like I like authenticity. And I do. I don't mind artifice as much as you do. But of course, I would love everything to sound authentic. I mean, that would be the ideal, right?
Yeah.
And yet, and we had this talk a couple weeks ago when we were talking about Quentin Tarantino. His dialogue doesn't sound.
I say I don't like artifice. Who's my favorite screenwriter? Quentin Tarantino. Everything he says is like, no one talks like that.
No one talks that way.
But it feels, but it's authentic to something.
Yes.
I don't know how to. I also feel like Tarantino does a good job of making his movies feel like they're not actually in this world.
Agreed.
So again, and that's I don't mean this. I mean, just putting it in contrast to Aaron Sorkin. Aaron Sorkin always sets up his movies and scenarios within the real world. Always.
I agree with that.
Which so again, and that's okay. But Tarantino's movies are always just a little bit otherworldly.
He reminds me of, and you might violently disagree with this.
Okay. Wait, who's he?
Tarantino's writing, in a certain way, reminds me of David Mamet. Because if you were to look, well, first of all, because I can't think of two writers where there is more of a danger of someone getting it wrong.
Yes.
Right? If Tarantino has largely sidestepped this because he is also really good at casting. But if someone can't get the feel of the words in their mouth, it would be an unmitigated disaster.
Yep.
And just trust me on this, people who don't frequent the theater. You think like Shakespeare with bad actors is boring? There is nothing worse than someone doing Mammoth that doesn't know how to do Mammoth.
Yeah, it's not that it's boring. Actually, that's the difference. Shakespeare done poorly is boring.
Right?
Mammoth done poorly is like nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah, it's like punching
It's you
in the
screaming,
face.
"Nobody talks like that!" for like hours.
And yet, when done right, it is supernatural. It just flows.
Because I think what they're trying to get at is an authentic thing inside of people. I think they're trying to tell a story and they're trying to get to something that is authentic, and they're using manufactured dialogue to do that. I remember. Do you remember when Mamet came to Tufts to talk?
I do.
Were you there for that?
I was.
And there was a Q&A part, and some people thought this was jerky. I thought it was the best thing ever. Someone raised their hand and said, "How do you write such realistic dialogue?" Which is just such a loaded question. But it was asked by a college student with much, sincerity. And I'll never forget this.
There's never more sincerity than in undergrad. Just
because
never.
I'll never. Do you remember his answer?
I don't.
Till the day I die. He goes. There's two things I remember. There's a few things I remember from that besides meeting him that night. But one of them was he says that his answer to that question was he goes, I ride on the subways with a tape recorder and I'll sit in diners with a tape recorder and I'll tape record people's conversations and I'll write bits down and actually no, I just make it up. Next question. That's what he did. He goes like I do all this stuff. No, actually I just make it up. Next question. Like his answer was, I mean, come on, I just make it up. What do you want from me? Like he went on this whole oh, I do all these different things to catch, and he's like, nah, I just make it up.
Yeah.
It was so like it was like that poor kid, but he did it as a joke, but the answer was just like, I mean, this is what I do. I write stuff. I mean, how do you ask Quentin Tarantino, how do you ask Nicholson, how do you become such a good actor? I'm good at what I do.
Another friend of ours from college who turned into who has become a playwright was discussing writing, and someone else who wanted to write stuff was like, how do you deal with writer's block? And he was like, I don't get writer's block. It's like, if I don't have anything to say, I'm not writing. I'm doing something else, right?
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
That's pretty cool. The other thing that he did that night, the other thing that he did that night, just to digress, that he did that night that was so great is he was reading different sections from things that he'd written. He'd written a book, and he goes, I'd like to read different selections from different, some poetry, some of my short stories. And he goes, now first for some poetry. Rain, rain on my window pane. Okay, now for some short stories.
Awesome.
I just love David Mamet, man. That guy kills me every time. I think he's a guy that he does struggle to try to create something real and truthful, but I'm a total disciple of his stuff in general. His book, sure. True, and I'm looking at it. I can see it in my office. At home, all of my books are my non-churchy religious books, and all of my religious and churchy books are here in my office. Okay. And among them is my Mamet book, True and False: Heresy and Common Sense for the Actor, which I consider a religious book. It is a book that helped me understand my calling in life. Which is a ridiculously pretentious thing to say. Like, as I say it out loud, I'm like, oh God, who am I? But it's true. It's what I am.
I wanna wrap up by talking about having spent 45 minutes or more talking about how in many, many ways we prefer dialogue to monologues. I want to end by talking about awesome speeches.
Yes.
Because I
Especially
think
since
I
we
agree
didn't actually
with you.
we didn't actually do any quotes. We could have just done quotes back and forth for an hour.
Yes. Hopefully, audience, this has been more interesting for you than that would have been.
I am slightly worried that this is the worst episode we've ever done.
Positive feedback, audience. Let us know what you think, unless it's bad.
Yeah, don't tell me if it's bad.
Right? Lie. We
You know what I'm
are
saying? He's make me feel better.
we we were drama majors. We are impossibly narcissistic and yet at the same time insecure.
It's true.
Um, there is something here. Here is one thing that I will say that where speeches have it all over dialogue, right? Just unquestioned superiority. It is difficult for me to think of a truly memorable character that doesn't have a speech or two. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yes.
Like in movies, in plays, in movies, there is a moment where the movie stops and somebody says something and it's awesome for whatever reason. It doesn't have to be like badass. It could be sad or funny or something. But I'll give you an example. Animal House would not be Animal House without the character of Bluto, right?
Sure.
And Bluto, while he is amazing, would not be quite the same character without the "was it over
Right.
when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor"
Well played.
speech.
Yeah.
You know? Um, Jaws. That the Indianapolis speech, the USS Indianapolis speech, is I think I agree with you. I think it might be the best monologue in film history. But it comes in the middle and it fits perfectly in. It comes in the middle of, I think, the best scene in the movie. The three of them sitting around that table. Just
Beautiful.
Just
But
communicating.
that's part of the reason they feed into each other. That's it.
Yes.
It works. It's a
Yes.
showstopper that doesn't actually stop the show. It develops the show.
Yes. Yes.
I
Um,
think. I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please. I mean, I can continue, but what were you saying?
The beginning of Glengarry Glen Ross, Alec Baldwin's speech is one of the greatest things ever put in film.
Yes.
It's so brilliant, and especially because it wasn't in the play, and Mamet
Right.
wrote it for the screen, and then Baldwin just nails it.
He like,
Um,
he chewed it up, spit it out, made it his baby.
made
Oh,
it his baby.
I can't even come up with a metaphor.
It's pretty great. But then there's other stuff like, I mean, you know, Walter Sobchak in Big Lebowski's eulogy for Donnie.
Yes. Yes.
It's not super. I mean, actually, it is pretty memorable. But it's like it's at the end, but it does culminate. It kind of culminates the ridiculousness, absurdity of his character. Mm-hmm. You know, or another Coen Brothers, Fargo, watching Marge at the end when she's driving the criminal in the back seat, and she does the whole speech about like all that for a little bit of money.
Yeah.
And she does a speech, and like I'm getting like goosebumps. Her speech at the end of that movie is so simple and not grandstandy, and it's one of the most perfect moments in my lifetime of movies. And of course, we said Samuel L. Jackson's Ezekiel 25:17 speech, which, by the way, is in no way quoting the Bible.
It's not. Is it right? Right.
It is like that much, but that's fine. That's
It
fine.
uses words, and the Bible also uses words.
No, I mean, it's like he takes this little thing from one verse. First of all, that long thing would have been like 12 verses. Let's just be
Right,
clear about how
right.
verses work.
Yeah.
But it's like he takes this one little verse and goes and pops it up, which is interesting. It's fine. But yeah.
I have speeches.
Brad Pitt's speech in Inglourious Bastards.
Yes.
And I want my scalps.
You don't win an Oscar without a speech.
Interesting.
Anne Hathaway, I mean, functionally, that song was her speech.
Marley Matlin, Children of a Lesser God. Boom! I actually have never seen it. She might have like a sign language speech. I don't know.
I confess I haven't seen it.
Okay.
The fact that I haven't seen it doesn't stop me from hating you right now.
You don't win an Oscar without having an Oscar speech.
Even, I mean, even, you know...
Daniel
even
Day-Lewis
if you
had to
don't
have that
remember
moment where
it-
he slammed his hand. Daniel Day-Lewis had to have that moment where he slammed his hand down.
Yes.
And said, and Jennifer Lawrence won. My brother was like, why did Jennifer Lawrence beat Jessica Chastain? Well, one, I think her performance was amazing, and I'll just disagree with him on that. But the moment when she took over the scene, when she was in the room with three other actors, with Bradley Cooper, who is a really good actor, by the
Yes.
way, and underrated, De Niro, who is De Niro, and who in that movie actually is De Niro again for the first time in 15 years.
Agreed.
And the woman whose name I don't know, but who is a real actor. And then the
Jackie
guy
Weaver,
who plays
the mom.
yeah, and the guy who plays Beansy from Sopranos is the other guy, and all actors. And she's this 23-year-old, and she goes, "By the way, I own this movie." And that scene, she owns
the movie.
And the reason Jessica Chastain has moments in Zero Dark 30, and I think her performance is stellar. But I think the reason she doesn't get in the real conversation to win was she didn't have the Oscar moment.
Right.
Which is fine. The movie doesn't need it, but she doesn't win the award for it.
It's hard to take over a scene through dialogue.
Yep.
Because if you're taking over a scene and it's dialogue, you're not serving the scene, right? You're not serving the other actors. You're not like it's not really happening that way.
I think Nicholson in A Few Good Men is as close as it gets.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It pains me to say.
I think it's tough, and I also think like to take it away from just the award context. I think that's what I was saying. Was like it's easier to remember performances when there is a speech.
Yep. Speeches do something special for us. Yes. I think you're right. I think you're right, and I want to think more about that. I want to really think about what that's about. Dialogues, but I wonder if dialogues are better for us in the long run. That's the weirdest thing that I've ever said.
Perhaps.
That's a really weird thing to say. But I feel like monologues are delicious, but dialogues are like nutritious. Yeah. Yeah. I think that is me putting the cherry on top of the pretentious sundae. I think that's it there.
Well done. And folks, he felt this way before it was cool.
Where are my horn-rimmed glasses?
I wanna just list some amazing speeches because please.
I thought we were doing that. Yes, do it.
Yes. Network. Okay. The famous line from it is, "I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." The entire
jumping off that, Stanley Spadowski's speech in UHF when he says, "This floor is as dirty as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore," is the great moment of Michael Richards' career pre-Seinfeld. You're welcome. And one of the great moments of UHF.
Nicely done.
You're welcome.
This has bits of dialogue, but it's basically Humphrey Bogart being awesome. The end of Casablanca.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So many lines in that are famous. You've got
The Hill of Beans.
Right. You've got
You may not regret it today or tomorrow, but someday and for the rest of your life.
Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday and for the rest of your life. We'll always have Paris.
Golly.
Here's looking at you, kid. He says, "Here's looking at you, kid," earlier in the movie, but that's where you remember it from.
You're making me want to watch Casablanca right now.
Go. I'll finish up here. There is a movie that I have spoken about on the podcast before that is truly one of the best movies ever made. It is an older movie, and if you don't like older movies and you watch this and you don't like it, that's on you. It's called The Third Man. And have you seen it?
The Cuckoo Clock.
Exactly. The Cuckoo Clock. I have to read this to you because it is amazing. Orson Welles plays a guy who is justifying to his friend Holly, a man named Holly, he's justifying his criminal activity. How he is good for the people even though he is basically a crime lord in this town. In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love, 500 years of democracy and peace. And what did that produce? The Cuckoo Clock. So long, Holly. And he just leaves. And he's just like, and it is, find it on YouTube. It is perfect. It is a perfect moment. And it's not a super long speech like the USS Indianapolis. It's not even as long as, I don't think Daniel Day-Lewis has a speech as long as the Indianapolis speech in Lincoln. And he's...
Most movies don't have speeches that long. That's what's amazing about it. It's captivating.
But yes. That's fair.
Yes.
but it's not just a line. That isn't just a line. It's like the guy's character in one. And I feel like one of the reasons I like it so much is it's short and it comes as part of dialogue,
Yep.
but it's long enough to have real heft, and
Yep.
it's clearly so important that it's imbued with more meaning than just a line of dialogue.
Yep. I'm with you. The Ferris Bueller monologue at the beginning of the movie when he's like, "This is my ninth sick day," is amazing.
Yes.
Just amazing. And
Yes.
that whole speech is fantastic. I've already said Glengarry Glen Ross. Edward Money at the end of Unforgiven. That's Clint Eastwood's character at the end of Unforgiven. Um, is you give Ned a proper burial and you stop cutting up and killing whores, or I'll be back to kill every last one of you. And he does this whole long monologue. It's just like,
Right? Yep.
it's like all of Clint Eastwood distilled into like one moment of just like, oh, thank you.
Right.
Unforgiven's in my secret top 10, by the way.
Sure. I take zero issue with that. Full Metal Jacket, the drill sergeant. Um, the centerpiece of, let's be honest, the better half of that movie.
Yes.
The half of that movie that is not a total mess.
Yes. The other one is and this is one of my favorite little movies. It's another David Mamet thing, but it's based on a Terrence Rattigan play called Winslow Boy. This one character who's like the housemaid, who's basically inconsequential for the entire movie, gives a speech at the end. And I'm going to talk about this for tomorrow's mailbag as well, where it just makes me cry like a baby. She gives this little, like, she's telling a story, and I'm just like,
We've been asked recently in various ways. I think we've been asked what are movies, or we've spoken about what are movies or things that we like, even though they may not be good for us morally. There is a there is a movie. First off, it's Neil LaBute, who is a
oh yeah,
terrible person. I mean,
maybe.
he's
I think he must be because it's the only, like, you can't spend so much time chronicling terrible people unless you're a terrible person.
I don't want to believe you're right about that. I don't want to think, but I think I do. I think I
Yeah.
do think you're right. Um,
Yeah.
his second movie, I think his second movie, Your Friends and Neighbors. Have you seen
Yeah.
it?
Yes.
There is a speech that Jason Patric gives to Catherine Keener
Yep.
that, and it is a monologue, and he never yells, and it basically takes her from standing to cowering and crying on the floor,
Yep.
and I feel like I literally can't say a single line from this monologue.
No.
Although I remember snippets of it. It is one of the most powerful things I've ever seen, and it is, and I enjoy it. I enjoy it, and I think that makes me a bad person a little bit. You know what I mean?
Maybe. Maybe.
Just for the duration of that monologue, I'm not a good guy.
I'm with you.
You know?
Yeah.
Um, I can't end on me not being a good guy. A
Can't you
line
go?
a line
Okay,
with
last one, and then I gotta go. Last one. Here we go.
yeah.
Last one. Give it to us.
This is a movie that you don't love, and I don't love it either, but this line is amazing. The end of Blade Runner, where Rutger Hauer's character dies,
Yeah.
and it's in like he's had this like knockdown drag out fight with Harrison Ford, and were it not for the fact that he's a robot that is slowly disintegrating, about to decompose and die, he would have killed Harrison Ford because
Right.
he is clearly stronger, clearly has more stamina. He's just
Right.
better physical specimen. But it becomes clear that he's about to die, and he says, and this doesn't even make sense. Like, these words don't make sense, but it captured my imagination. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. Time to die.
Oh,
Right?
that's
I
pretty
have
awesome.
goosebumps.
I don't hate Blade Runner. I just
Nor I. I just don't think it deserves the stature that it has in science fiction.
good way to end this thing. I love it.
There you go. So, I'm not even sure what we're going to title this episode. I don't even know how to...
Monologues.
Monologues?
Monologues. Movie monologues.
Writing and stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, we've talked for a while. So, you know what,
Yes.
guys? This has been another Second Breakfast podcast. I'm Andy Roth alongside Phil Duvall. We'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.